The SIRUI VP-1 full-frame cine primes are very contrasty, they're very sharp and very optically balanced lenses. So when I found out how much they are priced, I was kind of blown away. The VP-1s are a set of full-frame mirrorless lenses. They're all T1.4. They come in 3 focal lengths so far. So we've got a 24, a 35, and a 50mm. So good spread of focal lengths. I think that will suit most people. For a 3-lens set, which you also get this nice Pelly case for, early bird pricing, which I believe is $1,599, which will default back to $1,899. That works out at around $549 per lens for early bird, and then they're going to be $649 as standard. They are mirrorless mount only, but the good thing to note is that they are user interchangeable, which is fantastic. One of my biggest gripes with mirrorless cine lenses is you're locked into a single mount. The lenses all ship with an E-mount on them, but whether you buy them as a single lens or a case like this, they will also come with the additional mounts. Canon RF, Nikon Z, and fantastic Leica L. Good news there, LUMIX people. So the VP-1s are interesting. They matched very well between lenses. They didn't lose contrast when the sun was beaming straight down them. And also, they just didn't seem to fall apart when I was shooting with them wide open, which really surprised me. I think often with budget lenses, especially sort of ultra fast budget lenses, it can often be a bit of a marketing gimmick to sort of shift lenses and grab attention, and often when you try these lenses, they're not really usable below, T2.8 or something like that. The story's very different here. At T1.4, they perform very well. There's no sort of major gotchas, there's nothing really crazy happening, they don't lose contrast, maybe a little bit of vignetting, but nothing too distracting. I could barely detect any chromatic aberration, even when wide open. They're quite contrasty looking lenses as well. They tend to render a little warmer than I'm used to, but they definitely pop. There's a lot of 3D pop in these, and I think that's because obviously they're a super fast aperture, so if you're shooting wide open, you're going to be able to blow your background out. But I just found the out of focus area to be sort of incredibly smooth and not distracting. Like, everything is very consistent, which I think just adds to this perception of sharpness. So we're going to look at sort of side-by-side lens tests in a bit, but perhaps the contrast and the sort of out of focus fall off from these lenses adds to sort of like an increased perception of sharpness, which I think is interesting. Because of the way that they sort of render the out of focus area, they have really nice bokeh, much nicer than other lenses I've looked at. There's no distracting sort of out of focus area. Everything's just very smooth. Your eye is immediately drawn to whatever the subject of the frame is. Focus breathing is non-existent. Again, really surprising to see that, especially on a budget set of lenses. Great minimum focus as well, so I will show you what's the closest you can get on each lens. In terms of chromatic aberration, it's very well controlled, very difficult to notice it, definitely isn't overpowering. If you really stress test these lenses, you can make it show up. I tended to find sort of a green chromatic aberration more prevalent, definitely more controlled CA than when you shot with the Nightwalkers wide open. And I think it's in that territory of really just being absent or not really being able to notice it in real world applications. Flaring is very subtle and subdued, and if you remember a few videos back, we looked at the Cooke SB3s, which had the absolute opposite behavior. Lenses with lots of character, and now we're looking at these lenses, which, are kind of at the other end of the scale. But this conversation around character and personality in lenses is subjective. You might argue that the way that these render the out of focus area is, in a sense, their own character. Okay, lens comparisons. So was really interested to see how these stack up against other lenses that I own. So let's take a look against the Vespids. So we're using the 50mm here with the Vespids and VP-1 for the comparison. Straight away, I think you can see here that the VP-1s are much warmer than the Vespids, which, is interesting because I often consider the Vespids to be quite warm already. especially when I compare them to other lenses. But the VP-1 definitely pushes even warmer. I think the VP-1 also seems to push a bit more contrast. If you have a look, the colors are a bit more intense, especially if you look at the red jumper. So let's zoom into Steph's face to see how this handles skin tones. So T2.1 on both of the lenses, so that's wide open for the Vespid and stop down a bit for the VP-1. I think honestly, if I had to choose, again, super personal preference, but I do probably prefer the rendering of the skin tone with the Vespid. The VP-1, you know, because of this warmth, it pushes a much warmer skin tone. It's something I really noticed, I think, when I was shooting at the beach. I kind of assumed it was just like a warm ambient bounce from the sand that we were filming that sort of added this warmth into the image, but I think these lenses are just naturally quite warm. But I think just generally the sort of gradation in the color fidelity and the transition between colors on the Vespids is a little bit nicer. I would say that because of the warmth, you're losing some of the gradation between the sort of yellow and red tones in the skin tone, and it maybe comes across as looking a little bit mushy. Whereas the Vespid definitely contains that nice transition between, you know, the detail between the yellows and the reds. You know, all of this, of course, is subjective. You may prefer the VP-1 here, and there's no right or wrong. So at T4, it's hard to really see huge differences in sharpness between the two, but I do feel that the VP-1s are a hair sharper. There's just a bit more definition on the jumper texture than you can see in the Vespid. You can also see the difference in color intensity, with the VP-1s being much more vibrant. In terms of chromatic aberration, you know, you can see there's loads more here on the Vespid. On the color chart scales, you can see it all cropping up here when we've got some sharp contrast gradients between the lines and the scales. On the Vespid, it's very a mix of magenta and green, whereas there's only really a hint of green on the VP-1. And then when you stop down to T4, it's barely visible, but on the Vespid, it's still very much visible. Okay, let's stack it up to the Sigma Art lenses, so the 24-70 50mm. Again, you can see the warmth of the VP-1, especially against the Sigma, which is much cooler. The Sigma lens is definitely a lot more neutral, and in terms of sharpness, it's really difficult to tell difference between the two. And there's also zero chromatic aberration on the Sigma. So the Sigma, I think, you know, is the sort of pinnacle of what we call clean and controlled lenses. The VP-1, you know, sits somewhere between the Vespid and this lens. Now let's take a quick look at how it stacks up against the LUMIX S 50mm lens at 2.8. Seems to hold up pretty well next to it, not seeing major differences in sharpness, difference in color temperature of course, but again, holds up pretty well. I think I maybe prefer the Arles here, but again, there's quite a drastic difference between them. Again, there's a focal length difference, so it does add a little bit of difference in terms of perspective and stuff like that. But you can see immediately that the Arles pushes much warmer. Wide open, you can see much more chromatic aberration on the Arles, and I think generally I just prefer the out of focus area on the VP-1, to be honest. And I think across all of these lenses, when we do a sort of focus breathing test, the VP-1 just seems to have this more consistent and sort of cleaner out of focus area. Okay, so SIRUI previously released some great Super 55 lenses, the Nightwalkers, so let's have a look at how they stack up against these new VP-1s, which obviously are full frame. So I put the RF mount on the VP-1s and I checked them on the Komodo. They do look quite similar, so they definitely seem to share the same DNA in terms of color and contrast. It does look like the VP-1s do seem to have a bit more color saturation and contrast. I think they just have an edge over these, especially wide open or at T1.4. They definitely have much less chromatic aberration and appear a little bit sharper. The Nightwalkers are just a lot fuzzier at T2 or T2.8 and below. Overall, I think the VP-1s are optically a little bit more superior. They feel a bit more advanced. They're just a little bit cleaner and sharper, even wide open. You can't hate these lenses. It's impossible. I think this is what I said with the Nightwalkers. You know, even if you don't like clean, balanced, clinical lenses, The price of these is kind of staggering for what you get. For the amount of control that these lenses have, I've not really seen anything ever at this price point before. You can pick a free lens setup at £1,500, and that's around the price of a single Vespid. I think personally I maybe prefer the Vespids, but with that price differential, it's kind of hard to argue against these. There are also plenty of features within these lenses that outperform the Vespids. So you've got a much faster aperture, they perform much better wide open, and they perform even better when you stop them down to the Vespids native aperture T2.1. There's little to no chromatic aberration, no focus briefing, they're contrasty, they're sharp. They're small, they're lightweight, they're pretty solid and well built. The focus and the aperture rings are very well dampened. They come with interchangeable mirrorless mounts. I mean, what's not to like about these lenses? You can argue that they aren't the most interesting, that they don't have the most character, but when they're priced this cheap, they should be very disruptive to the market. They come in a consistent set, they come with a Pelly case. If you're looking to invest in your first set of cine lenses, you could do a lot worse. I think maybe sometimes SIRUI is considered a sort of a budget brand producing sort of lower end gear, and it is in a sense. This is definitely budget gear, but it's definitely punching above its weight, and it's definitely holding its own against lens sets that are 3, perhaps even 4 times its price. So yeah, I'm really interested to know what you think about these lenses. Let me know in the comments down below. Let me know if you're thinking of picking these up. And of course, if you've got any questions or I forgot to mention anything, just drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you. But that's it for today. I guess there might be affiliate links in the description. I don't know. But yeah, if you buy from those, I'd appreciate it. If you don't, no worries. But yeah, I'm Ed, and until next time, I'll see you later.